Hi, everybody, and welcome today. It's an exciting day. This is our first in our webinar series this year, 21-22 season. So welcome. My name is Dawn Ellis-Mobbs, and I'm the Education Manager with Room 217. And although I'm new in this particular position, I've been involved with Room 217 in some capacity since around 2012. And again, I'm thrilled to be hosting what is our first webinar of the season. And the topic today, as you can see, is music and resiliency with Sarah Pearson. As usual, we'll go over just a few housekeeping items. Everybody is muted now. At the end, if it comes to our question session, or if you need to unmute yourself, you can. But for right now, everybody's muted. As well, in Zoom, if there's two different ways that you can view the call. One is by speaker view, and the other is by gallery view. And so if you go to the waffle at the top of your screen, you'll be able to choose which view you would like for this particular call. As well as when Sarah's going to be delivering her presentation, and if you'd like to ask a question, we'll have a question answer at the end. You can type that into the chat, and the chat function is found in the bottom, the toolbar of the Zoom screen. So you can go ahead and send me questions as she's delivering her presentation. And so without further ado, we'll start, but this is an exciting time for me to go over a few things that are happening at Room 217. And so we'd like to thank as well, our webinars are always presented free of charge. They're free for everybody. And this is because of the generous support of the George Lunan Foundation. And today we have Music and Resiliency with Sarah, but we have a variety of upcoming webinars. The next one will be on October 13th, and it's Making Music in Adult Day Programs with Ruth Watkiss. And over the summer, we've had some exciting things happening at Room 217, and that includes some recording and working on our virtual learning studio. And so we're very excited to announce that as of September 15th, we will have Ukuleles for Care, which is one of our virtual learning studios. And following the Ukuleles for Care, we'll be offering Bells for Care and Music and the Developing Brain. And of course, you can always find our virtual learning studios at the web address at the top of the screen. And I should also say that the webinars, this webinar will be available about 5 business days after. If you have to leave or if you miss it or want to share, it will be available on our website about 5 business days after. And as well, we have our music care training. Over the past year, we've pivoted to virtual offerings of music care, and we're continuing on with that. So upcoming, we have level 1 being offered on October 15th and 16th, level 2 on November 19th and 20th, and level 3, we have an intake of level 3 candidates on October 13th, running through to November 24th. And very exciting, you may have heard about this or seen this, but we are actually, as of October 1st, launching our Music Care Certified program, our new branding of Music Care by Room 217, and our app. And the app is extremely exciting for us. It'll be available by Google Play or the Apple iStore. And it will be launched and released on October the 1st of this year. And you will have access to Room 217's music and programs 24/7, which is very exciting. As well as October 1st is the launch of our brand new website. And there you can find more information about our Music Care Certified programs, which is for individuals launching October 2021, and for organizations, products, and services on March 2022. And so today, Sarah is going to lead us through a session, as I said, on resiliency. Resiliency has been talked about more than ever in mental health circles since the COVID pandemic started in 2020. Yet what does it really mean to be resilient against life's challenges and the world's injustices? drawing on case vignettes from her work as a frontline music therapist on a psychiatric unit during the pandemic. And using social justice and trauma-informed lenses, Sarah will explore how music can connect us to the cornerstones of basic mental health resiliency, while also asking, when is resiliency used as a substitute for resistance? Sarah is a certified music therapist and a registered psychotherapist working in various community and private settings in Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario. She's developed education and training programs for Room 217 and was fortunate to meet caregivers and stakeholders from around the world who are passionate about music care. She's currently a PhD candidate and part-time instructor in the Faculty of Social Work at Wilfrid Laurier University. Thank you so much for being with us today, Sarah.
Thank you, Dawn, for that warm welcome. And hello, everybody, especially to the familiar names. I don't see any faces, but that's because that's how we're doing things today. Just want to say, yeah, thank you to Dawn for that warm welcome. And it's really cool, on a personal note, to be on this other side of a webinar today. In my time with Music Care by Room 217, I hosted many of these webinars, so it's a real honor to be back in a guest role. And I am going to share my screen. Okay. I have learned that I can't multitask while sharing Zoom screens. So, okay, there we are, did it. Thumbs up, Dawn, if you can see my, okay, great. Okay, so today we are talking about music and resiliency. I'll just give you a bit of a heads up. I am in a brand new home that I just purchased, which I'm so excited about. I am in a beautiful 140-year-old building right in one of the major intersections of Kitchener, Ontario. Windows are open because it's a gorgeous day. We really want the breeze in here, but it means that every now and then there's some noisy street traffic or fire trucks or alarm, just there's noise from the street. So we may pick up on some of that. But those are the joys of working from home, and kind of makes me happy to share a little bit of my audioscape with all y'all. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start by locating myself. So I am in Kitchener, Ontario, in downtown Kitchener. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Neutral peoples. These are the Indigenous nations of Canada on whose land we are occupying. And in particular, where I'm located is a part of Canada called the Haldimand Tract. This beautiful picture that we see here is the Grand River, which is the river around which Kitchener is built. And the Haldimand Tract is 6 miles deep of the Grand River. It's land that was promised to the First Nations following the American Revolution, promised by the Crown as a thank you for supporting the British in the American Revolution. And it was never fulfilled. It's a promise that remains that remains broken and is really central, I think, right now to the conversations we're having in Canada about Indigenous reconciliation, about truth. And I don't think that we can have a conversation today about resiliency without also talking about justice. And on the lands of Canada, justice so deeply means as well, and justice for Indigenous people, and for understanding the ongoing ways that our that our governmental social systems, as well as our social relationships, continue the work of colonization and the harm that is causing for some people over others. So I will be speaking more about the role and the connection between resiliency and justice. So the goals of today's webinar are to define resiliency. What does this even mean? I'll give a few definitions that I like, and we'll also try to understand toxic resiliency. We might have heard of toxic positivity. I just heard about that recently. It's going around the internet. I love it. And there's such thing as toxic resiliency too. And I think that's important to identify. So we'll discuss that. We'll use a trauma-informed lens to learn about polyvagal theory, about the impact of stress on our nervous systems. If you're not familiar with this, I think this is really crucial, just basic mental health 101 information that we should all know about because it impacts all of us. And then finally, we're going to get to the music part of it. We're going to look at how music can support healthy resiliency and good, healthy nervous systems, as well as how it can do the opposite, how music can increase our stress responses. So I'm going to introduce myself with a little bit more, just kind of go over the different hats I wear, because I sure do wear a lot of hats, and I try to bring all of them to the table. And I believe that today, today's topic invites that. So I'm a certified music therapist. I have been since 2013. So that's 8 years now. And I've been working in mostly hospital-based settings doing music therapy. For many years, I was in palliative care and oncology, both inpatient and outpatient work, community hospice. And then in the last year and a half, I've been working predominantly with adult inpatient, in an adult inpatient mental health unit, 2 units actually. And that work has been really, really eye-opening and just a real privilege for me. I'm also a registered psychotherapist. So in the last few years, I've been building that practice more. I do private counseling with folks in the community here. I'm a PhD candidate in social work. I am researching gender-based violence in performing arts communities. I am an instructor. I teach part-time in graduate and undergraduate programs at Wilfrid Laurier University. I have also had the immense privilege to teach the music care training through Music Care by Room 217, and been offered many opportunities to grow as an adult educator through Room 217. So incredibly grateful for that. And I spent 6 years working with Music Care by Room 217. I think those are all the hats I can think of today. I also want to thank my teachers, and there's so many of them. But everything I'm sharing today, I've learned through working with clients, through working with mentors, including mentors at Room 217, through instructors who have taught me about mental health related content, through colleagues, through discussions, through reading books by authors, by listening to podcasts on these topics, by fellow musicians. So just want to honor that this information and knowledge I'm sharing today is very much just a collective effort and is ongoing. So what is resiliency? So first of all, a language thing. I actually don't know what the distinction is or the grammatical correctness of resilience versus resiliency. I think that they both, I hear in everyday language, get used interchangeably. For this presentation, I'm talking about resiliency, but that can also just be called plain old resilience. Here we have an image of a little shoot of green popping up from the rocks. And I recently, in my old place, had this beautiful pollinator garden that I had grown, full of all kinds of lovely, native pollinators that were there to really just, create what I hoped would be like a loving and healthy ecosystem in the little patch of land that I've been living in for the last 10 years. And then the property owners contracted landscapers came along one day and just mowed it down. And I came running out of the house screaming, "Stop, stop, stop." And he yelled at me. It was like, "They're weeds." And I said, no, they're not. I grew these. And so for anyone who's had their garden mowed down, I mean, it was absolutely devastating. I felt gutted, not just because I had nurtured these plants, but also because it just seemed so senseless and unfair that this was something I had, grown and nurtured for, to create healthier ecosystems and just, and then it just gets mowed down for no other reason than some kind of like useless lawn maintenance that isn't supporting climate justice or anything. And it just felt so gut-wrenching, just devastating. And then a couple of weeks later, I was kind of looking closely, and I could see that the sage plant that had been mowed down right to the bottom, right to the base, had little sprigs of green, little green sage leaves springing out, and that the hummingbird mint similarly had just little furls that were creeping along the ground. And I thought, okay, that is resiliency. Unjust, unfair things happen. Life happens, and we bounce back. And it's that bouncing back that is a complicated and amazing phenomenon. The ability for things in nature to bounce back is truly remarkable. And yet, at what point do we stop relying on that bounce back quality, that ability to bounce, and just stop mowing down the lawn, like mowing down the plants, and so that's the interesting thing about resiliency, is when we focus a lot on people's resilience, we also need to focus on the things that they're being resilient towards or against. So we need to focus on the miraculous nature of the miracle that life can persevere. Just a friendly reminder to turn off to mute yourself if your speaker's on. The remarkable ability of nature to persevere, but also the things that force us to persevere. So keeping both of those perspectives in mind. So here is a definition from Psychology Today that I thought was helpful. So it really is, this is more from like a clinical psychology perspective. Resilience is the psychological quality that allows some people to be knocked down by the adversities of life and come back at least as strong as before, rather than letting difficulties, traumatic events, or failure overcome them and drain their resolve. Highly resilient people find a way to change course, emotionally heal, and continue moving toward their goals. Psychologists have identified some factors that appear to make a person more resilient, such as a positive attitude, optimism, the ability to regulate emotions, and the ability to see failure as a form of helpful feedback. All right. Here's another definition of resiliency. This is from an academic article. The concept of resilience has evolved from an individual level characteristic to a wider ecological notion that takes into account broader person-environment interactions, generating an increased interest in health and well-being research, practice, and policy. At the same time, the research and policy-based attempts to build resilience are increasingly under attack for responsibilizing individuals and maintaining, rather than challenging, the inequitable structure of society. So all of that in the previous slide, where we talked about positive and attitudes and optimism, the ability to regulate emotions, and the ability to see failure as a form of helpful feedback, that maybe isn't something to be so thrilled about when we start using that as a way of putting that responsibility on individuals, rather than looking at the challenging and equitable structures that are forcing folks to draw on their resiliency. And resiliency is not a binary. People aren't either resilient or resilient. We all have resiliency. It's an innate, it's an innate part of being a living organism. We draw on it in different ways, under different circumstances and at different times in our lives. Common misconception about resiliency is that people who are resilient are superheroes. You know, that old adage that you should never say to someone who's going through something really hard that, oh, I could never do what you do. You know, we all know that that's not a supportive thing to say. It's like saying, I don't even want to put myself in your shoes. You're on a pedestal. You're a superhero. I could never go through, you know, this illness of a loved one, or the loss of someone, or the loss of a job, you're a hero. No, they're not heroes. They're human beings going through tough things. So resiliency is not about some people being superheroes, and therefore we don't have to worry about them. Oh, I think I'm missing another slide. Oops. Okay. And so bottom line, when resiliency becomes toxic, and this is something that I've been researching a fair bit, I believe is when we are not balancing the focus on an individual's or a community's resilience with the wider structures that they are being resilient against. We need to hold both in place. And this is a great image that was circulating all over Twitter. Stop calling me resilient, because every time you say, oh, they're resilient, that means you can do something else to me. I am not resilient. And that's from Tracy L. Jackson of the Louisiana Justice Institute. Okay, so we're going to talk about one of my favorite things to talk about, which is polyvagal theory and the body's stress response. So understanding stress, we all have it. We're all on devices of some sort today, which are, inherently little, stress generators. These computers and screens and iPhones have an amazing way of triggering our nervous systems to go into some kind of arousal. If anyone has lived through the COVID-19 pandemic in whatever circumstance, you have probably experienced some kind of stress. All of us have been in different boats in the same storm. And if you've heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response, this is what we're going to be talking about. That comes from polyvagal theory. Polyvagal theory was developed by Stephen Porges. It is a theory that is based on how the nervous system responds to stress. And the way that I was taught about polyvagal theory was the idea that our nervous systems want us to be in the bottom of the screen, this green zone, this state of what my teacher, Linda Stelte, called the flow of life. We're in the river of life, the flow of life. When things happen, but we're able to deal with them, that's the flow of life. When we're able to have good social relationships, we're able to make eye contact, we're creative, we're responsive, we're communicative, we feel grounded and okay and well. Inevitably, things in life happen. Let's take this to a very survivalist perspective, or an evolutionary perspective. If we are in a jungle and a tiger pops up, that poses a threat to our safety. Our nervous systems, therefore, alert a stress response. Our arousal increases. We go into the yellow zone of fight or flight. So that's when we get that extra jolt to go, running away from that tiger. Now, when the threat is so significant that running or fighting isn't going to do it, our body goes to a final last resort and it slams the brakes on, and we get the dorsal vagal effect, which is the freeze. So we might just freeze suddenly, lie dead on the ground, and just play dead, and hopefully the tiger ignores us and walks away. Now, when that happens, if they walk away and we survive, what polyvagal teaches is that our natural instinct is to, when the threat is gone, eventually stand up, shake it off, because that threat has been so intense and there's so much energy built up, physically shake it off, and then go back to our communities, get a hug, laugh, celebrate, sing some songs around a campfire, be grateful that we survived, and then bring ourselves back into that place of social engagement. Now, in our society in particular, we have many factors that keep us on this upswing, going into fight, flight, or even freeze. And a lot of the ways that we recover, that we come down, the shaking off, the dancing it out, the getting the hugs, the going for a walk, the moving, those things not only are not terribly available in our everyday world, they're also often socially acceptable. We see this in particular in the COVID-19 pandemic, where we're so physically isolated from a lot of people and we're on screens all day. That ability to move and get a hug and make eye contact, just basic things that help us recover from stressful situations are absent. And then finally, what happens when we experience a traumatic event? That can either be a singular event or it can be a series of conditions. So, for example, neglectful parenting when we're infants, a series of conditions that create a non-stop loop where we actually can't ever get out of that arousal increase, where we can't ever get out of that fight, flight, or freeze. We're never able to recover from it. That's when we start spinning into what my teachers have called a trauma vortex. We're not able to find our way out and swoop down and go back into the flow of life. That's where trauma therapy and other kinds of ways of community healing and trauma-informed practice and trauma-informed support can be so helpful to get us out of that loop and down into the deactivation and the recovery and back into the river of life. So we're going to talk a little bit about how music does that. Here is an image of that tiger, the fight, flight, or freeze response, and then also of a gazelle, a common example given of the animal running away from the tiger. The gazelle can be so fast, so speedy, and yet also frozen and still, like you would never even see it. And it's just the most miraculous thing to suddenly see a gazelle or a deer or a moose. Just this freeze is absolutely beautiful. And I would venture to say that healthy resiliency, like this sweet little pocket, this little goal that we're trying to reach for, it's healthy resiliency is being able to tolerate going into that stress response, because life is stressful and it's part of being human that we experience adversity, but being able to tolerate stress, but having the ability to also recover from it and to learn strategies along the way and make lasting change that will make the next time we go through that stress response less traumatic, less challenging, or maybe just go through it more effectively, or maybe not have to go through it at all. So that would be the sweet pocket I think we're trying to aim for when we think about healthy resiliency. And I just want to make a plug for this book. Emily and Amelia Nagoski are two twin sisters who wrote this book, Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. When it was recommended to me, I thought, I'm a healthcare worker and a psychotherapist, and there's a mental health professional. There's nothing you can't teach me about burnout that I don't already know. And then I read the book and my mind was just blown, and I just recommended it to pretty much everyone I know. And it's one of the best examples I've read of just explaining how stress impacts our bodies, the individual, intrapersonal, but also the societal causes of the stress response. And most importantly, simple but profoundly effective things we can do to change it. Emily Nagoski is a sex educator. Amelia Nagoski is a music educator and conductor. So a really interesting combination there, both of whom in their own ways are experts in stress. The music part in particular is really cool for this crowd, so I recommend it. It's also important to say, I think, that mental health struggles can be a source of resiliency. So we have a lot of stigma about mental health struggles, anxiety, depression, addiction. I think those things are increasingly pathologized, and we can get very worried. Oh no, that person's a bit on the addiction spectrum, or that person's really anxious or depressed. We need to fix it. But also remember that these struggles can sometimes help keep us alive. In particular, in harm reduction circles for addiction, the message can often be that, look, sometimes it was the substance that we're using is the thing that's preventing us from ending it all. So it's actually keeping us going. It's making life tolerable when we're stuck in that trauma vortex. Same with anxiety, it can keep us going. Same with depression. It's just at a certain point, our bodies can no longer tolerate being in that constant stress response and that trauma vortex. That's when burnout happens. So that's another just, I think, important perspective to remember about resiliency, that our struggles can help us be resilient. And in particular in the COVID-19 pandemic, the word resiliency has been talked about more and more. At least I've never heard it used as much as throughout COVID. What's interesting now that we're seeing, I mean, at least in Canada, and to some extent in the US as well, just in my own personal experience, the media that I consume, you know, CBC News, podcasts, the New Yorker, like there's so much reported journalism right now about people working in the COVID-19 pandemic who a year ago were called, you know, heroes, frontline workers, heroes, who are just now leaving. They're like, we're so burnt out, we can't do this anymore. So that's a really interesting example of when there's a lot of focus on frontline workers, and that includes, I want to say, parents, folks working from home, folks surviving the pandemic in whatever way they need to. There's a shift happening right now in focusing on the resiliency, the ability to survive really difficult or intolerable situations. And the shift is now turning towards like, well, actually, why do I even want to try? Like, these conditions are becoming unmanageable, and I'd rather resist the structure than try to be resilient against it. So that's an interesting tipping point that's happening right now. We're seeing a lot of nurses in particular in Canada leaving, retiring, dropping out of the profession. And that's not the only sector where that's happening. There's a lot of shifts in the workforce right now due to COVID. So, music and resiliency. We're going to talk about some ways that music supports us to get into the flow of life. So to go from that fight or flight, or from that freeze, shutdown, and back into social engagement. One of the great joys of the pandemic for me has been that I started to work in my music therapy practice on an inpatient mental health unit. And the unfortunate thing about an inpatient mental health unit, where a lot of the folks who are hospitalized for psychiatric concerns are there involuntarily. And then you add a pandemic on top of that, where the visitors and the coming and going into the physical building is extremely limited and controlled. It's sort of, and also social gatherings within the building are also limited and controlled. A psych unit can start to feel a bit like a prison, because we don't have the inflow of community and family and friends coming in and out. We don't have as much encouraged mutual support, peer support, large groups. And there's not a lot of freedom. So it's pretty tough. And it's been I think a really significant kind of moral crisis for a lot of people working front lines in that sector, to be like, okay, like, how do we deliver patient care when we are trying to be person-centered, but literally the pandemic is making us have to turn our physical backs on people. So this is really hard. One of my great joys, though, in the pandemic was, for better or for worse, because it was facilitating gatherings, was just spending time on the units, having unofficial groups, not even official groups, but unofficial groups, where we just had a guitar hanging out. I play guitar, but not very well, but I'd just be ripping away on it, singing some Backstreet Boys, singing some Oasis, singing some Wonderwall, singing some Cranberries, with a bunch of other folks who are basically my age, a lot of people in their 30s on the units, all of us having grown up listening to a lot of the same music, and just singing together. And discussing it with some colleagues of mine, we just talked about how, was it like the most, life-changing therapy or the most important intervention to sit around singing some, Oasis? No, probably not. But did it help us just get out of that fight, flight, or freeze response and just get back into the flow of life for a few moments, a few precious moments? Absolutely. And it's getting back into the basic flow of life that allows us to gather our resources and mobilize to make important steps, to make important change, to make important decisions. Okay. So I've got a few examples of ways that we might think about how music connects us back into the flow of life. And none of these are concrete interventions or activities. They're more experiences of music engagement and of relating to music. And this is something that I hear a lot, and that, you know, to be honest, I feel a lot when I really feel music. There can be that feeling of, ooh, this music reminds me of who I am. And, you know, I'm thinking of that scene from Jerry Maguire where Tom Cruise is just driving away and he's like flipping through the radio, and then all of a sudden Free Falling comes on the radio and he's just singing it. He's just singing Free Falling as he's driving down the highway. And you get this sense, at least I get this sense, that, oh, this music is reminding Tom Cruise / Jerry Maguire of who he is. And I feel that with certain kinds of music, be it like fun, goofy music that I can blast and sing at the top of my lungs, you know, like just fun stuff, especially from my early youth, or, you know, kind of really intimate, deep, emotive music for me that just kind of connects me to my core values. So here I just have an image in the background of someone just holding their phone with some earbuds dangling. And this is just a very simple reminder that, you know, it's never been easier to hear music. And that sometimes just intentionally tuning in to the music that reminds us of who we are, connects us to our values, can give us motivation to set boundaries that we need to set, and or make courageous changes in our lives. Another way that music can connect us back into the flow of life is the physicality of it. I'm not talking about needing to get out there and, like, you know, sing and dance and kind of exhaust yourself. Just the fact of moving a little bit to make music. Maybe picking up a ukulele and strumming it, or in this case, we have a few folks just outside busking with some instruments that, you know, look that are quite physical. So particularly in Emily and Amelia Nagoski's research, they've looked at how the two most research-informed effective ways of completing the stress cycle and coming down to activating. The first one is just movement exercise, going out for a walk, going for a run. Everyone's different, but physical movement is one of the primary, is the primary way. The second one is creativity. So the physicality and the creativity of music making can have the same physiological effect on our stress response as moderate exercise, and help return us to that ventrovagal state, that flow state. And then the last way that I'm going to invite us to think about how music can support resiliency by bringing us back into the flow of life is returning us to relationship. So remember when I was saying that, you know, ideally after we've survived being chased by a tiger and we're, you know, the tiger has passed and we're getting up from our plane dead and we're shaking it off, then we return to our communities and laugh and get hugs and sit around a campfire and laugh about it. This return to relationship is a significant part of being back in that flow of life, being able to be socially engaged. And, you know, when I think about these just hanging out on these units, singing the Cranberries and Oasis and the Backstreet Boys, and the social engagement of it, the returning to a relationship, even people who don't know each other, but who are in this moment, you know, sharing this really cool thing. When music making is interactive or communal, it has that same effect of returning us to our village, of bringing us back into our social relationships. And so just a few examples of what this can look like: open mic nights, that feel good, nice, togethery feeling of communal music making. Community musical theater, oh, what could be more fun and kumbaya than that? 10-second dance parties, creating intentional playlists for ourselves to connect us back to our values and our selfhood, drum circles, community music sessions. These are just a few examples. As much as it's fun to talk about how music is so great and does all these great things for our mental health and well-being, it's, music is not benign. And in many ways, I increasingly feel like it's important to talk about music's adverse effects, as much, if not more so, than its benefits. So I'm going to speak a bit about how music can do the opposite of return us to the flow of life and actually create a state of hyperarousal, of fight or flight, or hypoarousal, freeze mode. And here I have an image of a concert hall, of a kind of traditional orchestra. And that's because, we're hearing more and more, and there's, I think, more research happening, certainly in music education and community music, and also just in the public's awareness of the arts sector, that there can be like tremendous mental health tolls on folks working within traditional Western performance structures. These structures are highly hierarchical. They're highly Eurocentric. So if you are an Indigenous person or a racialized person, there's a much stronger chance that you're going to be experiencing overt or covert racism or marginalization within that environment. And that the focus on perfection is not only unachievable because no one can be perfect, but it also has an antithetical response, or it rather than connect us to the joy and the creativity of music making, it fosters that sense of inadequacy and fear. So many folks who have engaged in music in some formal way in their lives have some complex issues around music. It might not always be bad, but I think it's important to remember that people can carry a lot of like baggage or even trauma around playing music or even listening to music. So having that stress response, that fear of not being good enough, or of the anxiety of trying to perform in a highly hierarchical environment, can have a significant toll on our fight or flight response. And then similarly, anything that can trigger fight or flight can also trigger freeze. I was discussing this yesterday with my colleague, Megan McMillan, who's a music therapist also at Grand River Hospital. And she was saying, we were saying, how can music like create like a freeze response? She was pointing out, anyone that has any sort of traumatic association with music, or maybe, for example, with a song, might hear that song and go into fight or flight, go into panic, or they might just fully dissociate. That's a really common response to a traumatic trigger with music, is just to fully zone out, dissociate, sort of check out. Similarly, I see this a fair bit in music therapy groups. It's not uncommon to just hand someone an instrument and say, hey, let's play this together. Let's, have this cool community music moment where we're all playing instruments. But sometimes handing a person an instrument that they may start to panic about whether they can or cannot play it right, may trigger not just a fight or flight response, panic, anxiety, but just like a full dissociation, like a freeze, like, oh, I can't even participate. So I think those of us who have worked in more kind of community music models or music education can probably recognize that. We've all probably, I've done it a bunch of times where I've like handed someone an instrument and hoped for the best, and then realized after the fact that actually I pushed them too hard. I didn't set it up right. I didn't give enough explanation or kind of warm us up into it. And rather than have this positive creative experience, this person has instead either gone into a panic mode, or have just sort of fully dissociated or checked out. So, these are important things to think about when we're working, particularly with live music making. So freeze response can look like not a freeze response, but any kind of stress response in music can look like feeling pressure in a music education setting, being triggered by a song that brings back traumatic memories, the presence of an abuser or a violent person in your music community. And this, we know more and more, is just so endemic in a lot of arts communities, that there is rampant, there can be rampant abuse that is covered up and supported and not dealt with. Experiencing racism or any kind of marginalization in a musical setting. Feeling performance pressure, or that pressure to be perfect. Being handed an instrument in a music therapy session that you don't know how to play. Guilty. General fear of judgment. Somatic injuries that prevent someone from playing. So if we have some kind of physical block that is a result of some kind of traumatic experience, that's interfering with our ability to, maybe bang a drum or play an oboe, that can be an example of this. Constriction and pain in our throat when we're singing is another example. These are all things to think about, that when we're encountering these, we should ask ourselves, as folks working from a music care framework, what is happening right now in this person's nervous system, as far as I can tell, and maybe they can tell us. Are we having like a positive flow of life experience, or are we having a fight or flight response? Or are we having a total like dissociative freeze response of this person kind of blanking out? And meanwhile, what's going on in my nervous system? Am I feeling bouncy and flowy? Am I getting like really anxious, kind of hyper arousal? Am I starting to just get tired and drowsy and drifting off and just staring at the door, kind of waiting for this to be over? That might be a freeze response. Notice what's going on in our own nervous system. This is all part of how we can support resiliency, which is finding ways to come out of that stress response stronger than before. So if we are encountering this in our music care practice, if we are encountering an activation of someone's nervous system, that's okay. That's part of being human. But let's look at ways that we can come back into the flow of life together, that we can come back, that we can shake it off either musically or physically, that we can come back into relationship, into community, maybe lowering the pressure a little bit, or slowing down, or connecting one-on-one. And then looking at how we can do things better next time, so that the stress response doesn't have to reoccur. So that is it for me for my slides, as far as music and resiliency. And I'm just going to pull up another little note here. Happy to take questions right now. So, and yeah, I'll just wrap up by saying that, yeah, looking at how music supports your own resiliency in your life or in your work, and remembering also that music can also help us find ways to connect to our values that might make us want to change some of the things that force us to be resilient in the first place, is another way of looking at music and resiliency. So happy to take any questions now.
I thank you very much, Sarah, for walking us through music and resiliency today, and just reminding everybody that if you would like to drop a question into the chat, I think Marian is helping with that as well. Just use the chat box with the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom screen for sure. I would like to. Sarah, I would love to ask you a little bit more about developing a playlist. Sometimes, that's a great way that we could start, or anybody can approach that. Are there some suggestions or tips in terms of developing a playlist that you could give to us?
Yeah. So I actually
let me find out.
Jeanette, I'm just going to mute you. Sorry, we're having some feedback. Yeah, so first of all, with playlists, I mean, I think where I've learned so much about playlists is from Jennifer Buchanan, who's written a few books on music and mental health, music and well-being. And so she's an expert. She's got, if you look up Jennifer Buchanan, music therapist, she's got a lot of blogs on playlists. But I don't think that we don't have to get fancy about this. With your play, like if you want to make some playlists, I mean, the sky's the limit. There's the playlists that maybe take us to like a really joyous, bouncy place, and the playlists that take us to a really introspective, intimate place. That's how I think about it. But obviously those aren't the only two ways that we can look at playlists. But what I think is fun, a fun way of building playlists can be going down the rabbit hole of songs. So sometimes, for example, for me, you know, I was a teenager in the mid-90s, and for me, just the music, particularly like 1995, is just so deeply evocative. And so I will go on down a rabbit hole of YouTube. I don't like to use YouTube normally. I like to pay musicians for their work, but you know, if I start looking up one song by the Gin Blossoms, then like the next song that pops up is going to be something by, you know, Third Eye Blind, and it will just be this wonderful rabbit hole that's bringing me back to music that I like forgot about. But for playlists, another way that you can look at it is ask yourself, what are some significant life events that have happened to me, good and bad, positive and challenging, and say, okay, what were the songs that I associate with that time? What was the music that got me through? What was the soundtrack to my life right now? There's no right or wrong answer to that. And I would encourage you to really build upon it. But we all have really rich life soundtracks. So ultimately, making playlists to connect you to your own values, that is your journey. I encourage it to be a creative one. Don't get too perfectionisty about it. I would say quantity and quality, and have fun. Let it be a rabbit hole. Let your feelings guide you.
Wonderful. And there's a question in the chat from Nick. It says, I'm really interested in creativity within education, on how experiencing creative activity can support learners to try new things, get things wrong, adapt, and move on. Do you feel that creative music making within a care community can have a similar role?
Oh, cool question. Yeah, I mean, yes, I do. I mean, that question was so beautifully asked and articulated. I do think that creativity can have a similar role in care communities. In particular, and it depends, of course, what we mean by a care community, but in particular, because I think when we are engaging in creativity together, we're blurring the binary between caregiver and care receiver. We're human together. We're humaning together. I benefit just as much from ripping out some cranberries and Oasis, you know, on a Wednesday afternoon on a psych unit, as maybe even more so. I might even get more out of it than the patients who I'm with. You know, we're all connecting to our inner resilience. So yeah, I think creativity is a spectacular way of combating the evils of perfectionism, and consequently just like getting us out of the kind of pathologizing context that a lot of care communities can exist within, where, you know, there's a lot of focus on problems and treatment. It can connect us back to our health, our humanness. So thanks, Nick, for that question.
Yeah, it's great. And I guess too, if we're talking about the music care curriculum, really what you're talking about is musicking, right? The definition of musicking, your description of just sort of creating together, creating in the moment.
Yeah.
Excellent. And you talked a lot about about adverse effects, which I really found helpful too, because that is part of it. And I was just sort of wondering offhand, if you're in a care setting and maybe you're working with somebody that may not be verbal, what would be some signs of adverse effects if you're watching, if you're bringing in music, either musicking or creating a playlist or playing music, what would maybe be some signs of adverse reactions?
It's going to look different for everybody because, um, especially when we don't have access to the word no, everyone will have different signs for it. And I think that's actually a really complex question, Dawn, about often if you have people who are nonverbal and we're offering them some kind of music care experience, the issue of like consent, did they consent to even be here, and if they did consent, was it like deeply informed consent or enthusiastic consent, or was it kind of just like, yeah, I don't really have much agency in my life anyway, so I'm here. So I think all of those things are really important to take into consideration when we're looking um, at whether a person is having a positive experience with us, drawing on our relationship with them, or the folks who are in supportive relationships with them and trusting relationships, to count, to draw on those as resources to say, okay, like knowing this person, or this person knowing that person as they do, is a time for us to stop. But the other side of that, though, Dawn, is that sometimes, and this is tricky, this is complicated, but not enjoying something does not always mean that we want to stop. Sometimes something can be really uncomfortable. But again, there's that resiliency. It's hard, but we are going to grow stronger through it. So let's stay here. This is where some growth is happening. But I want to be really careful about that, because we can, kind of get a little too woohoo. This is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that's not really helpful when certain people are getting knocked down more than others.
Right. Thank you for that, Sarah. We have one last question, and that was just, it's from Jane, and it's, in the palliative care setting, what experience have you had co-creating playlists?
I think probably some of the highlights of co-creating playlists have been life review playlists. So it could either be an individual leaving or creating playlists for their surviving loved ones to say, when you miss me, when you're thinking of me, like, this is music for you to remember me by. Or it can be the other way around. It can be folks making playlists to either memorialize or honor the relationship with the person who's dying. And then I know a lot of, like, I haven't worked extensively with playlists in palliative care. I would mostly do live music making and kind of creative, like, songwriting. But I know a lot of music therapists, at least, and other kinds of music care practitioners who work in palliative care will also make pain playlists, so playlists that are supportive of pain. Also, I know Dr. Sarah Rose Black, who many folks here know, has done some phenomenal research on music in MAID and medical assistance in dying, and just playlists at the end of life in general, and is currently doing some research on other kinds of ways that music is supporting end of life therapies. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing today. You can, just a reminder to everybody, we have our launch of our website on October the 1st, and which is really exciting, and the rebranding of that, and our Connect app. If anybody has any questions that they didn't have answered, please feel free to send them through to us. And again, Sarah, thank you. It was very informative today. We're very pleased to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.